知らねえようだから教えてやるぜ。責任だけを刃に乗せて刀を振るのが隊長だ。で刀を振るのは薄汚れた暴力だ。俺たちはそれを戦いとは呼ばねえ。アイゼン、やっぱりてめえは隊長の器じゃねえんだよ。
Sometimes, a simple exchange is everything. After arriving at the battle of fake Karakura town, Ichigo is mocked by Aizen, saying that Ichigo has no hatred left for him, as Orihime and his friends are now safe, and that a sword swung without hate is like an eagle without wings. The captains, however, come in to protect Ichigo and give the rebuttal to that accusation. Ichigo is not alone, he has a society now. If his sword cannot reach Aizen without hatred, they will lift him up to help him. Then Soifon and Hitsugaya come to give him their own wisdom, their own visions. The former to Ichigo and the latter to Aizen himself. Soul Society is not resigned to die, it fights to live, says Soifon. And a captain, a Soul Reaper, swings a sword out of duty alone. To swing one out of hatred is just violence, says Toshiro to Aizen. And both bore the truth in a way. After all, at the ending of this arc, Ichigo's sword would be ultimately swung out of duty alone to defeat Aizen, like that of a Soul Reaper. And it was without hatred, incapable of calling upon the rage he felt in Hueco and Soul Society prior. And it was done so that nobody had to die. It was done to save people. Even more so, the humans. The Soul Society prides themselves in protecting. But there is one fundamental truth that all of these three statements misunderstand. An assumption they take for granted when they really should not. Ichigo Kurosaki is not a Soul Reaper, in the same way they are. Not at all. And that small yet insurmountable difference would cost Ichigo everything he fought for. After all, what worked for a Soul Reaper, the path of the ideal Soul Reaper, is not the path that's right for Ichigo. But that would take time to become apparent. Spoilers for Bleach up till the end of Arrancar. Today we are picking off right where my last video stopped. You don't have to watch it to get this, but it's recommended so you have a holistic view on the character of Ichigo. After all, this video only deals really with the material of around 5 volumes. So I would recommend watching the last video so you have a foundation for what we're talking about here. But still, a brief recap. During Arrancar, Ichigo was fighting to save Orihime and take control of his hollow side. In his fights, he seemed to be making progress towards that goal, acknowledging little by little the hollows that he fought. However, in his fight with Ulquiorra, it was shown to the audience that he was still not good enough, both in mind and body despite his progress, ultimately having to give in to instinct to save Orihime, which ended up killing Ulquiorra, something he tried to avoid doing against every opponent up until that moment. This, thereby, makes Ulquiorra Ichigo the first person he has killed, and an undeniable proof of the inadequacies he failed to repair during this first part of the arc. And with it, this unwilling killing of Ulquiorra begins the downward spiral which we will be covering today. Once we pick up with Ichigo again is through the eyes of Rukia, somebody who was not at the company and thus wouldn't have their judgment clouded by witnessing Vasto Lode Ichigo. And yet, it's clear to her that something is amiss, and the wording she uses here is crucial. She says the eyes of Ichigo weren't the eyes of a victor, but also were not the eyes of somebody who was about to slay an enemy either. Now, in universe, she didn't witness Vasto Lode Ichigo, but we can infer that this statement is about the 2 other peaks of power that Ichigo had experienced up till that point. First, during the execution hill, where he used Bankai for the first time, the eyes of a winner, and his hollow takeover, the eyes of somebody about to slay an enemy. From that, we can clearly see that despite achieving another peak of power, that has not given Ichigo any more progress towards self-acceptance. Ichigo is conflicted about what he did and unable to call upon said power at will. In this very scene, he would describe the mask as feeling heavy, as if the shame and guilt he feels from killing Ulquiorra literally manifests in the weight of his mask. Even the patterns of his mask, before slowly consuming it in a blaze of glory, are now changed. Just lines reminiscent of his Vastolorder form, where they sprouted from his broken heart. And now, when using his mask, he doesn't even have black eyes anymore. Now, in this compromised state, Ichigo once again says a quote that he means with all his heart, but does not yet fully understand. It's not like I ever know what I'm gonna do, but I take them down because I have to. I don't care if we're in a different league from the other Espada, it's all the same to me. If I have to take it down, I will take it down. This quote is very indicative of Ichigo's current mindset. At the end of his fight with Brinjaw, he finally understood that he wants to win, and that he has to as well, paving the way towards understanding that he both has desire and duty. But now, after the fight with Ulquiorra, we can already see a regression start to take place. He's thinking of must, of duty. He's ignoring the feelings bubbling in the depths of his heart. He also says it doesn't feel right after Yami starts talking trash about the people he fought. And of course it doesn't, because he understands them on some level by fighting with them. He respects them on a subconscious level. He says he doesn't regret killing Ulquiorra, and that on principle, on the side of laws and absolute truth, is correct. After all, if he had to kill Ulquiorra to save Orihime, he would, in a heartbeat. But really, he is regretful of killing Ulquiorra. Not of the killing itself, but the reality that killing him wasn't a choice he made. It was a result of him being unable to stand up by his own beliefs and build upon his choices. It was in fact something that happened to him. He killed Ulquiorra without meaning to, and that is upsetting him, and yet he does not acknowledge that. He's trying his hardest not to. He's ignoring it as much as he can. He's talking about duty, focusing on duty, distracting, polluting his mind, trying his hardest not to think about what happened up there in the capital. To not confront the inevitable reality of why it happened. The fact that it was the result of the choices he made from the start of his arc. The fact that that demon that appeared in the cabinet is as much a part of him as the Zangetsu. But he doesn't have time for that, right? We're in the middle of a war, right? Even if it feels like dying, he still has to protect them. Of course, ignoring himself to this degree makes him unable to properly holofy. He's too guilt-stricken to acknowledge he even has instincts now, so of course, his mask doesn't work properly. Then, Kenpachi and Byakuya show up to try and help them. But their advice, sadly, is still that of Soul Society, that of Soul Reapers. It's still pushing Ichigo on the path of duty. Byakuya says that Ichigo's duty is to protect Karakura Town. And that's an important quote, because it's exactly the same thing Kenpachi said before he goes to fight Ulquiorra. Back then, he said that was wrong, that his job is also to protect his friends, acknowledging that he has desires and not only duty. But now he doesn't even want to think about it. He doesn't want to acknowledge his desires. And so he simply agrees, yes, it is his duty to protect the town. He is the Deputy Soul Reaper of Karakura Town. He has to protect them out of duty. And the moment he stepped onto the Garganta, with that mindset, his ultimate fate was sealed. I must stress, however, that Byakuya, or Mayuri, or Unohana, or any of the Soul Reapers I'm going to be talking about in this video are being malicious. Nobody here, aside from Aizen, is trying to sabotage Ichigo. In fact, Byakuya here is just reflecting something Ichigo told him, because Ichigo in Soul Society told Byakuya to do what is right even if the law says otherwise. And so Byakuya took that he should follow his duty, his vows, even if the law said otherwise. And he's just repeating that to Ichigo, telling him to follow his vows, his duty. However, the problem is that Ichigo does not need to hear that right now. It is in fact the worst possible thing to tell him right now. During the Garganta, Ichigo's talk with Unohana makes one thing clear. Due to the fact Ichigo has a new perspective, unclouded by the deceptions of Aizen, he is the only one who can defeat Aizen, literally symbolized by Ichigo being the only person who never saw Kyoka Suigetsu and is strong enough to fight at the level of a captain. After all the other strong Soul Reapers didn't see the Aizen that truly was, the Aizen at the end of Soul Society. They saw the Aizen that pretended to be the Aizen of Turn Back the Pendulum of the beginning of Soul Society. And Ichigo saw him firsthand. His first experience was with Aizen. At this point, it doesn't look super bad, for Ichigo. He is doing worse than he was before his fight with Ukiura. But still, hardly, compromised. And all of this is to prepare for what's about to happen. Because after Ichigo arrives, things take a turn for the worst. Because, as Aizen says, the Soul Reapers put their trust in Ichigo, raising him up above them to become their savior. But Ichigo Kurosaki does not desire that at this moment. He does not desire anything. He is trying his hardest not to think about desire. Now, we circle back to the opening quote, and I will take this opportunity to say that while the Soul Reapers here are well-meaning, and it is a good show of progress to them that they are coming to the help of Ichigo, where at the beginning of the arc, they rejected helping Ichigo. All of them here, including the Vizards, are huge hypocrites. They say they want to take upon Ichigo's burden, but they rely on him all the same, because they cannot hope to surpass Aizen. Hitsugaya is an even more blatant example, saying that swinging a sword out of hatred is not the way of a captain, and yet he does so anyway. Said hypocrisy would eventually compromise all of them aside from Yamamoto, as Aizen drove Hitsugaya into a frenzy by switching places with Momo, thereby breaking their whole formation. And Soifon says they fight to live, and that saving, protecting, those things are just pretexts. But that betrays her words to her vice captain, and the teachings of the very Soul Society that she claims to uphold. Soul Reapers are ready to die and win by any means necessary. That is their creed. Soifon, however, only adheres to half of that, and thus, alongside Hitsugaya and the other half-hearted captains that include Shinji and Kyoraku, who didn't want to risk their lives or their friends by using Bankai because their Bankai would absolutely kill allies as well as enemies, were cut down by Aizen, leaving behind only the history of society personified, Yamamoto Genyusai. But still, said duty of Yamamoto was bound by old customs and ideas, a limited perspective, giving opportunity for that perspective to be exploited, and said old perspective could not beat Aizen, though it was enough to reach him, giving an opening for Ichigo to attack, and for his attack to finally hit its mark. But at that moment, Aizen would tear a hole in Ichigo's determination, attacking its very foundations. Aizen then reveals to Ichigo that every fight he took part in was in the palm of his hands. That the truth of the matter, the truth that belied his whole life, is that none of his fights were the result of his own efforts. Ichigo, of course, attacks Aizen at this notion that everything he did wasn't actually the result of his own actions. But isn't that weird? Isn't that just another contradiction? After all, back in Hueco he did everything in his power to not think about what happened up there, denying it was him or his desires. And yet, when Aizen tells him to his face that none of the things he did up there, or before that for that matter, were his desires or his actions, they were in fact the result of a demon controlling him, that demon being Aizen himself. Ichigo strikes at that demon, strikes at Aizen. The reason is obvious, of course, transparently so. Ichigo does want credit for the things he did. He wants to say it was own will. He worked hard. He has to win. It has to be his fault, not those of a monster controlling him. And yet, he couldn't do that when it came to the Okiura fight. Because as Aizen says, admitting such would be too painful for him. Some truths are just too hard to believe. And thus the truth comes to light. Despite acting out of duty, Ichigo is still shackled by his desire for acknowledgement, and his desire that everything he did was actually his fault. And said attacks bound by desire cannot ever reach Aizen. He, who surpassed both the duty-bound limited Soul Reapers and the Arrancars, monsters born from masks of desire. So Ichigo is relentlessly teared down by Aizen, and as he is about to unveil the truth of his existence, something happens. Isshin arrives. A human, a Soul Reaper, a father, and frankly, the perfect person to talk to Ichigo to sway him for what he's willing to do right now. To throw himself at the wolves if it means achieving his goals. And yet, Isshin doesn't want to talk about the very truth in front of his kid's eyes. He wants to stop Aizen first, because that's what they should do. And Ichigo agrees, spouting words from Rukia, another Soul Reaper. Once again, bounding himself to duty. Once again, reflecting the things that are being said at him. Not out of malice. Isshin is not like trying to make his son, depressed. But inevitably, what he, Isshin, wants to do will end up damaging his son. That is his fatal flaw. Of course, respecting other people's boundaries is not a bad thing. When Rukia did so all the way back in Volume 3, it was a sign of growth for her. But it was also an indicator that she had a conflict of her personal life and her duties as a Soul Reaper. And Ichigo now faces a very similar conflict. But what worked for Rukia would never work for Ichigo, because Ichigo Kurosaki is not a Soul Reaper. During the following fight against Gin, Ichigo does better than he did at the beginning when he arrived, but his mask still cracks easily. And of course, he's trying his hardest to walk the path of a Soul Reaper, despite also trying to tap into the powers of instinct of his hollow mask. Gin takes note of that, of course, and says that Ichigo cannot fight Aizen like that, and tells him to give up as they both sense Aizen's growth into a new form, one attempting to step upon the royal palace where the king sits. The three Soul Reapers who are fighting Aizen, despite living in the world of the living, are still capable of making themselves acknowledged, because unlike the Vizards, they fought with full-hearted determination. But still, that's not enough to defeat Aizen. Gin and Aizen then exit the society, leaving behind an Ichigo consumed by fear from Aizen's new height of power and guilt tearing him apart from the inside, the result of his failure to uphold his own ideals in his fight against Okiura. And all of that making him unable to holify properly. All combining into a realization that he cannot carry out the duty of defeating Aizen at all. Though his father attempts to motivate him, to make him to move. And to do so, Isshin would tell him the only thing he knows will work, but also the worst possible thing you could tell Ichigo at this moment.
泣くのか？また守れなかったってそこで座って泣くのかよ。
This quote, of course, is referring to Ichigo in Memories in the Rain, where he was mourning over the grave of his mother, crying that he couldn't protect her. And that flips a switch in Ichigo, bringing back some of the wind from before, but also regarding a shift in his mentality. The miasma of self-doubt made it hard to discern, but is now clear to Ichigo. He doesn't only have a desire to protect, but a duty as well. And this has always been present. In Volume 1, for example, he says that the big brothers are born first to protect their smaller siblings. A duty to protect, yes. He didn't only have desire to protect. Now Ichigo finally marries his fundamental desire with the path of duty of a Soul Reaper, and with that, he's finally resigned to fight Aizen, even if it is futile. However, that vow that he was reminded of would continue to rupture him inside. But Aizen, both to show he has suppressed Soul Reapers and give an opportunity to Ichigo, destroys the Kototsu, providing a last chance of swords to him and his dad. The willingness of Ichigo to face Aizen gave him the chance to attain something, a technique that takes advantage of society's nature, one that will be taught to him via a method developed by Soul Reapers of ages past, and will be taught to him by a Soul Reaper, and said technique would make him one with his Sanpakuto, a Soul Reaper's weapon. All of this to say, the final Getsuga Tensho is the ultimate Soul Reaper technique, and thus its power is that of duty, that of a Soul Reaper. And of course, Ichigo is ready to learn it only now, after finally becoming more of a Soul Reaper by marrying his fundamental characteristic to it, to that of duty. But his next encounter with Zangetsu shows the problem with that approach, the problem that's been brewing this whole time, and that sadly cannot be stopped anymore, not even by Zangetsu. As Ichigo arrives in his inner world, it's in the depths of an ocean. And the skyscrapers that pierce the sky, the possible future that existed before, were now reduced to the tiny Karakura town. The ocean, turns out, is from the rain that poured down so relentlessly it submerged completely Ichigo's psyche. The consistent reminder of Ichigo's greatest failures, the rain, manifesting everywhere in his very mind. Karakura town, of course, became the tiny town of today instead of the possible metropolis of the future, because Ichigo can't imagine that future anymore and move forward. No, the only thing he has are his memories. Memories deep in the rain. The root of the despair that has colored Ichigo's mind so far, which even now he's trying to ignore, meets him face to face and throws Ichigo's lack of understanding in his face. Ichigo failed to take heed of their last encounter, failed to take heed of the warnings, failed to understand, and so, little by little, he lost a little bit of control all over Hueco Mundo, up till he finally reached a breaking point in his fight against Ulquiorra, and he has been spiraling down ever since. By the end with his fight with Gin, even when he could put on the mask, he was brittle compared to against Ulquiorra, that even destroying it completely didn't take away fully the power of it. Ichigo, once again, tries to simplify things and run away from the reality that monster is also Zangetsu. He wants to fight Justice Hollow again, thinks that will be enough. But then a simple truth is stated, a truth that was said before, implied before, but never so bluntly. We are one. We are both your power. Sadly, Ichigo is not ready for this, and those words would fail to reach him. It's far too late after all. He is already too deep in the path of a Soul Reaper. Even as Tensa Zangetsu says that what Ichigo wants to protect is different from what he wants to protect, Ichigo fails to notice the similarities between his two spirits, the supposed Hollow and the supposed Shinigami, the supposed opposites. Both who spoke of what they want instead of what Ichigo wants, and yet he would still blindly just follow Zangetsu and ignore his quote-unquote Hollow, even as the two became one right in front of his eyes. And so they begin fighting, and we don't see of it until the reveal. The next time we see Ichigo, it's after he has achieved it. Transcendental Soul Reaper power. All to fight Aizen, who surpassed Soul Reapers and Arrancars by subsiding both in his desire to sit upon the unbearable vacancy at the throne of heaven, to seek a greater understanding as a fearless flower. And Ichigo decided to protect, putting it all on the line for that duty, becoming a man with much stronger eyes than he was before, finally finding his determination again. Both two different paths to enlightenment. It may look like that to an outside observer, but that is not the case at all. Neither of these men right here are anything close to enlightened. In Aizen, there is an arrogance, born out of winning against Gin by turning his very desire into power, believing oneself now to be beyond opposition, beyond evolution, beyond fear, a fearless flower, full of understanding. Even Ichigo himself is such a fun distraction. And such arrogance cannot be enlightened at all, because to think of oneself as the end of evolution requires to think oneself is perfect, unchanging, eternal. And not even the strongest Kido or Zanpakuto can be that. Not even the strongest being can be that. To think you can surpass the world itself by pouring your heart's desire into the whole Kyoku is the highest level of arrogance. An expression of pure id, of pure desire. Fitting for the one who was for a time the king of Wakamondo. And in Ichigo, well, in Ichigo, it's not clear there's any problem at first. After all, Gin remarks that his eyes are much stronger now. He has gained the eyes of a determined soul. He is calm, collected, in control, unlike when his Hollow took over before, or unlike Aizen himself. And he exposes Aizen's contradictions, forces him to a breakdown, forces him to realize that he is not perfect, and Aizen cannot stand it, he loses it. And so he goes back on his declarations of being the pinnacle of evolution and evolves once again out of pure desire to win this fight. But after Ichigo reveals the final Getsuga Tensho, it all comes into focus. His Zanpakuto wants to protect, but Ichigo has to protect. And it's either give up one or risk losing the other forever. When faced with this final choice by the physical manifestation of this mind state, between what you want, what your inner soul wants, and what is your duty, and what you have to do to uphold it, the choice Ichigo would make is clear. Because Ichigo is now walking the path of a Soul Reaper, even if for only a moment, even if for only a day. And a sword swung out of duty, without preconceptions, wholeheartedly and with determination. Now, that is a sword that would be capable of reaching Aizen. Because that is a sword born of the understanding Aizen saw lacking in the captains, the lack of understanding that made Aizen hate them. And that sword would be the sword of the ideal Soul Reaper. Ichigo Kurosaki would swing that sword. However, Ichigo Kurosaki is not a Soul Reaper. He is a boy who made a vow while holding the bloody corpse of his mother, a vow to protect. And so, while losing your powers to a Soul Reaper like Rukia would mean just staying in the society for a while, for a human like Ichigo, he will lose it forever. And while to a Soul Reaper his eyes might look strong, might look determined, it is because Ichigo resigned himself to his role, to his fate, and decided to play his part no matter the cost to himself. And again, to a Soul Reaper that might be good, great, ideal, perfect. But to Ichigo Kurosaki, to give up the power to protect for the sake of what he protects in the first place is to walk headlong into an unbearable hell. And Ichigo knew this, after all, before he met Rukia way back. Ichigo could see ghosts, but couldn't save or interact much with them. He knew, while growing up, that sometimes the ghosts disappear and he didn't know why. And that was the taste of powerlessness. That despite knowing that there are things that could be done, he knows he can't be the one doing them. And that taste tore into his heart like steel. And yet, he would walk into that hell willingly, because that is the path he's on now. He walked it to its destination, follow it to its conclusion. But the path of a Soul Reaper to Ichigo Kurosaki only ends in the despair of powerlessness. But still, he swings that sword at Aizen. He attacks with killing intent, because that's what a Soul Reaper would do. But ironically, the first time he tried to kill his opponent, they live, as opposed to before. And so, that ideal perfect Soul Reaper, with the help of a certain candy shop owner, defeats Aizen. But Aizen's last words shake Ichigo just as much as the derision had before in the fake Karakura town. He speaks of doing what you want, to make the world the way it should be, not the way it is. Words ironically very similar to what Ichigo had said once before, way back in society. And so Ichigo turns his head. It's far too late for regret. The path he was on rejects Aizen, and so he has to as well. Even as the words Aizen says resonate with him. Even as he wonders that maybe Aizen was only lonely because nobody could walk the path he walked. The only reason Ichigo accepted all of this, of course, was because his other path of working with desires, of working with oneself, backfired due to his own inadequacies. That, along well-meaning words from some and outright malicious ones from others, pushed him into this mindset where he would be okay with this, and left in his mind no other choice, no other moral option but to give it all up. He thanks Rukia for letting him have the power to protect for a time. And it's over. But that's wrong, of course. Ichigo gave in to his desires against Ukiura, and that was not ideal for him. And right here, at the Mugetsu, he does the opposite. He gives himself up to his duty, costing the very power he worked so hard for in the first place. And that is clearly not ideal for him either. And he had the opportunity to understand it all, to see the synthesis right there in Zangetsu, right during his training. But he was not ready to see. His mind, his body were not ready to understand. The idea of putting both your desires and your duty together to protect. And so, all that was left to him was to resign himself to this sorry fate. All the way back then, when Gin remarked that his eyes looked stronger now. Those were not the eyes of an enlightened man. They were not the eyes of the winner. They are strong eyes, but they are strong because they are the eyes of a condemned man, walking towards the gallows, standing tall because he must all the while. But if you know Ichigo, you know this is no end for him. Not at all. If anything, it's no wonder he would jump at any chance he would have to have power again. And it's even less surprising when it's revealed in a novel that less than 5 months after the battle, Orihime went to Soul Society to talk with Rukia about a way to bring Ichigo back to form. Because of course she did. She and Shad would say that it's unbearable to see him like this. Powerless. Helpless. That is not Ichigo. But that is a story for another time. I hope you gain a greater understanding of this moment in this arc. If humans are all imitations of monkeys, and gods are all imitations of humans, what are our saviors, if not just people imitating the gods, even if they themselves are merely human? Many thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, support the channel, if you may. See you next time.